The rain battered the windows of the Manhattan penthouse, a relentless drumbeat that mirrored the pounding in my chest. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass, watching the city blur into streaks of neon and shadow, wondering how I'd ended up here, bound to a woman I'd loved in silence for years, in a marriage that felt like a cage. Tonight, Clara Everett would sign the contract that would tie us together, not by love, but by cold, calculated necessity. My name is Riley Kane, 28, a corporate lawyer who'd clawed her way up from a small-town life in upstate New York to this glittering, ruthless world. I'd always been the one who kept her head down, worked harder, loved quieter. Clara, on the other hand, was a supernova, 30, radiant, the heir to Everett Enterprises, a media empire that could make or break lives with a single headline. Her auburn curls and sharp green eyes had haunted me since we met at Columbia Law, where I was the scholarship kid and she was the untouchable star. Back then, I'd buried my feelings, knowing she'd never see me as more than a friend. Now, fate had twisted us into this, a marriage to save her company and my career. The deal was simple. Clara's father, Richard Everett, had died 6 months ago, leaving a will with a brutal clause. Clara had to marry within a year to inherit the company, or it would pass to her scheming cousin, Victor, who'd run it into the ground. My firm, desperate to keep Everett Enterprises as a client, needed someone to step up, someone loyal, discreet, and willing to play the part. I volunteered, not because of ambition, but because I couldn't bear the thought of Clara losing everything. She didn't know that part. To her, I was just the practical choice, the safe bet. "Riley, you're brooding again." Clara's voice cut through the storm's hum. I turned to see her standing in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the soft glow of the hallway. She wore a cream-colored dress that hugged her curves, her auburn hair tumbling over her shoulders. In her hand was the contract, its pages crisp and unyielding, like the distance between us. "I'm not brooding," I said, forcing a smile. "Just thinking." She crossed the room, her heels clicking on the hardwood. "About how insane this is?" She set the contract on the glass table between us, her fingers lingering on the paper. "A fake marriage. A year of pretending. You sure you're up for this?" Her words stung, though I knew she didn't mean them to. Pretending. That's what this was to her. To me, it was a chance to be near her, even if it was a lie. "I've handled worse," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You?" Clara laughed, but it was hollow. "I don't know, Riley. This feels like selling my soul." She sank into a chair, her gaze drifting to the rain outside. "But if I don't do this, Victor wins. He'll dismantle everything my dad built." I wanted to reach for her, to tell her she wasn't alone, but my hands stayed glued to my sides. "We'll make it work," I said instead. 1 year. We play the part, you get the company, and then we move on. Her eyes flicked to mine, searching for something I wasn't sure I could hide. "You're too good to me, you know that?" she said softly. "Always bailing me out." I shrugged, my throat tight. That's what friends do. The word friends hung in the air like a blade. Clara didn't notice, but it cut me deep. For years, I'd been her confidant, her study partner, her shoulder to cry on when her engagement to some Wall Street jerk fell apart. I'd loved her through every moment, never daring to speak it. Now I was about to be her wife, and she still didn't see it. We signed the contract that night, our signatures sealing a pact that felt like a vow and a betrayal all at once. The terms were clear. We'd live together, attend events as a couple, and convince the world we were in love. My firm would handle the legal side, ensuring Clara's inheritance was secure. In return, I'd get a promotion, a corner office, and a bonus that could change my life. But as I watched Clara sign her name, her hand trembling slightly, I didn't care about the money or the title. I cared about her. The next morning, the bon job began. I left my cramped Brooklyn apartment for Clara's Upper East Side penthouse, a place so pristine it felt like a museum. My boxes looked out of place next to her sleek furniture, my worn paperbacks clashing with her leather-bound classics. As I unpacked, Clara appeared with 2 mugs of coffee, her smile hesitant. "Welcome to the madhouse," she said, handing me a mug. "You sure you can handle living with me?" "I've survived your all-nighters in law school," I teased. "This'll be a breeze." She laughed, and for a moment, it was just us, Clara and Riley, like old times. But then her phone buzzed, and her face darkened. "Victor," she muttered, glancing at the screen. "He's already sniffing around, asking questions about our engagement." "Let him," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "We've got this." But as the days turned into weeks, the weight of our lie grew heavier. We attended galas, posed for photos, and smiled for the cameras, but every touch, her hand on my arm, my fingers brushing hers, felt like a spark I had to smother. Clara played her part flawlessly, charming reporters and board members alike, but I could see the strain in her eyes. She was drowning in the pressure, and I was drowning in her. One night, at a charity ball, things shifted. We were dancing, her hand in mine, her body close enough that I could smell her jasmine perfume. The room spun around us, all chandeliers and champagne, but all I saw was her. "You're good at this," she whispered, her breath warm against my ear. "Almost too good." My heart stumbled. "What's that supposed to mean?" She pulled back slightly, her eyes locking onto mine. "It means sometimes I forget this is fake." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Was she saying what I thought? But before I could respond, Victor appeared, his smirk cutting through the crowd like a knife. "Well, aren't you too cozy?" he drawled, his eyes narrowing. "I wonder how long this little charade will last." Clara stiffened, but I squeezed her hand. "As long as it takes," I said, meeting his gaze. Inside, though, I was unraveling. Because Clara's words had planted a seed of hope, and hope, I knew, was dangerous. Victor's presence lingered like a storm cloud as Clara and I left the ballroom, the weight of his words pressing against my chest. The city lights glittered below us as we stepped into the cool night air, but the warmth of Clara's hand in mine was gone, replaced by a tense silence. I wanted to ask her what she'd meant. Sometimes I forget this is fake, but the moment had slipped away, and I was too afraid to chase it. Back at the penthouse, Clara kicked off her heels and collapsed onto the couch, her dress pooling around her like spilled wine. "Victor's going to be a problem," she said, rubbing her temples. "He's digging Riley. If he finds out this is a sham, I'm done." I sat across from her, my suit jacket still on, feeling like an actor who'd forgotten her lines. "He won't find anything," I said, trying to sound confident. "We're airtight. The contract's solid, and we're convincing." She looked at me then, her green eyes sharp and searching. "Are we?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because sometimes I don't know what's real anymore." My pulse quickened, but I kept my face neutral. "We're selling it," I said, dodging the weight of her words. "That's what matters." Clara sighed and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "I just wish I didn't feel like I'm betraying my dad. He'd hate this, me lying to save his company." I wanted to tell her she wasn't betraying anyone, that she was fighting for what was hers, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I stood and grabbed a bottle of wine from the kitchen. "You need a drink," I said, pouring 2 glasses. "And maybe a break from thinking about Victor." She took the glass, her fingers brushing mine, and I felt that familiar jolt. "You're too good at this wife thing," she said with a small smile, but there was something fragile in her expression, like she was holding herself together with sheer will. The next few weeks were a blur of public appearances and private tension. We were the perfect couple to the outside world, smiling at board meetings, holding hands at fundraisers, but behind closed doors, the space between us felt like a minefield. I caught myself watching her too long, memorizing the way she tucked her hair behind her ear or laughed when she thought no one was looking. Every moment was a reminder of what I couldn't have. One evening, As we prepared for a high-profile dinner with Everett Enterprises board, Clara stood in front of the mirror, struggling with the clasp of a necklace. "Here, let me," I said, stepping behind her. My fingers grazed her neck as I fastened the clasp, and I felt her shiver under my touch. "Thanks," she murmured, her voice soft. She turned to face me, her eyes catching mine in the mirror. For a moment, the world stopped. Just her, me, and the unspoken truth hanging between us. Then she stepped away, breaking the spell. "We should go. Can't keep the vultures waiting." The dinner was a gauntlet. The board members grilled Clara on her plans for the company, their questions laced with skepticism. Victor sat at the far end of the table, his smile sharp as a blade. I played my part, deflecting questions with charm and legal jargon, but I could feel his eyes on us, waiting for a crack in our facade. Afterward, in the car, Clara was quiet, her hands twisting in her lap. "They don't trust me," she said finally. "They think I'm just a figurehead. Victor's been whispering to them, Riley. I can feel it." "Then we fight harder," I said, my voice fierce. "You're not just a figurehead. You're Clara Everett, and you're going to run that company better than any of them could." She looked at me, surprised, and something softened in her expression. "You really believe in me, don't you?" "Always have," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Her gaze held mine, and for a second, I thought she might say something that would change everything. But then her phone buzzed, and the moment was gone. Back home, I found myself pacing the penthouse, unable to sleep. Clara's words from the ball echoed in my head. "Sometimes I forget this is fake." Did she feel something too, or was I reading too much into her exhaustion, her vulnerability? I was so lost in thought that I didn't hear her approach until she spoke. "Riley, why do you do this?" she asked, standing in the doorway of my room. She was in pajamas, her hair messy, her guard down. "Why put yourself through this for me?" I froze, my heart hammering. "Because it's you," I said, my voice raw. "Because I'd do anything for you." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought I'd gone too far. But then she stepped closer, her hand reaching for mine. "Riley," she whispered, and the way she said my name felt like a confession. Before I could respond, her phone rang, shattering the moment. It was her lawyer, with news. Victor had hired a private investigator to dig into our marriage. The game was getting dangerous, and I knew we couldn't afford to slip. But as I looked at Clara, her hand still in mine, I realized the real danger wasn't Victor. It was the truth I was too afraid to face. The investigator's shadow loomed over us like a guillotine. Clara's lawyer had been blunt. Victor's man was sniffing around, interviewing old classmates, digging through our social media, looking for any sign our marriage was a fraud. Every step we took now felt like walking on glass, one wrong move away from shattering everything. I woke to find Clara already up, her laptop open on the kitchen counter, her face pale as she scrolled through emails. "They found someone from Colombia," she said without looking up. "A guy I dated briefly. He's telling them we were never a couple, you and I. That it's all too convenient." I poured coffee, trying to keep my hand steady. "He's got nothing solid," I said. "We've covered our tracks. The contract's locked away, and we're living together. What can he prove?" Clara's eyes met mine, raw with fear. "He doesn't need proof, Riley. He just needs doubt. If the board thinks I'm lying, they'll side with Victor." I wanted to pull her into my arms, to promise her we'd win, but I stayed rooted, the counter between us like a wall. "Then we give them no reason to doubt," I said. "We double down. More public appearances, more affection." Her lips twitched, almost a smile. "You mean I have to kiss you in front of cameras now?" The thought sent a jolt through me, but I played it cool. "Only if you can handle it," I teased, though my heart was racing. That week, we leaned into the act. We held hands at a gallery opening, my thumb brushing her knuckles as flashes popped around us. At a charity auction, I bid on a painting she loved, her laugh ringing out when I won. Each moment felt like a tightrope walk, thrilling, terrifying, and too close to the truth. I wondered if she felt it too, the way our touches lingered, the way her eyes held mine a second too long. But Victor was relentless. At a board meeting, he slid a folder across the table, his smirk venomous. "Interesting photos," he said, his voice dripping with insinuation. "Riley and Clara, barely seen together before this engagement. Convenient, isn't it?" The board members exchanged glances, and I felt Clara tense beside me. I leaned forward, my voice calm but steel-edged. "What's convenient is you trying to undermine Clara's leadership with gossip," I said. "We're married. We're here. Deal with it." Clara squeezed my hand under the table, a silent thank you. But as we left, she was quiet, her shoulders hunched. "He's not going to stop," she said in the elevator. "He'll keep digging until he finds something. Then let him dig," I said, turning to face her. "We're stronger than him, Clara. Together." Her eyes searched mine, and for a moment, I thought she might lean in, close the gap between us. But the elevator dinged, and she stepped back, the moment lost. That night, we sat on the penthouse balcony, the city sprawling below us. Clara wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, her breath visible in the chilly air. "Do you ever wish things were different?" she asked, her voice soft. "Like if we'd met some other way?" My heart stopped. "What do you mean?" She looked away, her fingers tracing the rim of her wineglass. "I don't know. Sometimes I wonder what it'd be like if this was real, if we weren't pretending." I couldn't breathe. Was she saying she felt something, or was this just the wine talking? I wanted to tell her everything. How I'd loved her since the day she lent me her notes in law school, how every smile she gave me was a treasure I hoarded. But fear clamped my mouth shut. "We're making it work," I said instead, hating how weak it sounded. She nodded, but her eyes were distant. "Yeah, we are." The next day, we got a break. Clara's lawyer found a loophole in her father's will. If we could prove our marriage was committed by the end of the year, through shared assets, public devotion, or even a vow renewal, the board would have to honor Clara's claim, no matter what Victor dug up. It was a lifeline, but it meant raising the stakes. We'd need to sell our love story harder, make it undeniable. We planned a vow renewal for the holidays, a public spectacle to silence the doubters. I threw myself into it, picking out flowers, writing vows I wished I could mean. Clara seemed distracted, though, her smiles forced. I wondered if the pressure was breaking her, or if it was something else, something about us. One night, as we reviewed the renewal plans, she stopped me. "Riley, why are you doing this?" she asked again, her voice sharper this time. "You could have walked away. Why stay?" I looked at her, my chest aching. "Because I believe in you," I said. "And because I don't want to lose you." Her breath caught, and for a second, I thought she'd press me, force the truth out. But she just nodded, her eyes glistening. "I don't want to lose you either," she whispered. As we stood there, the city humming below, I felt the weight of what was coming. The vow renewal would be our biggest test, but it wasn't Victor the first feared. It was the moment when I'd have to say those vows and pretend they didn't mean everything to me. The vow renewal was set for a snowy December evening at a historic venue in upstate New York, a sprawling estate draped in fairy lights and evergreens. The plan was to make it a spectacle, proof to the board, the media, and Victor that our marriage was unshakable. But as the date approached, the line between performance and truth blurred, and I was drowning in the weight of what I couldn't say. Clara threw herself into the preparations, but I could see the cracks. She'd snap at small things, wrong flowers, a typo in the program, then apologize, her eyes haunted. I wanted to ask what was wrong, but every time I got close, she'd pull away, burying herself in work or excuses. I wondered if she was regretting this, regretting me. The night before the renewal, we drove up to the estate, the car silent except for the hum of the heater. Snow fell in thick flakes, blanketing the world in quiet. I glanced at Clara, her profile sharp against the window, and felt the ache of wanting her. Really wanting her. Not just as a partner in this charade. You okay? I asked, my voice cutting through the silence.
She didn't look at me.
Just nervous, she said. This has to be perfect, Riley. If we mess this up, Victor wins. We won't mess it up, I said, gripping the wheel. We're in this together. She nodded, but her hands twisted in her lap, and I knew she was holding something back. I wanted to push, to demand the truth, but I was terrified of what I might hear. Instead, I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently.
We've got this, I said.
She squeezed back, and for a moment, I let myself believe she felt it too. The estate was a dream when we arrived, all glowing lights and polished wood. We rehearsed our vows, standing in the empty ballroom, our voices echoing off the walls. Clara's were polished, perfect, like a speech she'd memorized. Mine were raw, written in the dead of night, when I couldn't sleep for wanting her. As I read them aloud, promising to stand by her, to fight for her, I saw her eyes glisten. She looked away quickly, brushing it off as nerves. The next day, the venue filled with guests, board members, reporters, Clara's distant relatives, and Victor, lurking like a vulture. I wore a tailored suit, my heart pounding as I waited at the altar. When Clara appeared, in a simple white dress that made her look like she'd stepped out of a painting, I forgot how to breathe. She walked toward me, her eyes locked on mine, and for a moment it felt real. The officiant began, and we played our parts. I said my vows, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Clara, you're my strength, my home, my reason, I said, meaning every word. I promise to be yours, in every way, for as long as you'll have me. Her turn came, and she hesitated, her hands trembling as she held the paper. Riley, she started, her voice breaking. You've been my rock, my partner, my everything I didn't know I needed. Her eyes met mine, and I saw something new, something raw and unguarded. I promised to be honest, to be brave, to be yours. The crowd sighed, but I barely heard them. Was she acting, or was this real? Before I could process it, the officiant pronounced us renewed, and Clara's lips were on mine, soft and urgent. The kiss was supposed to be quick, staged, but it lingered, her hands cupping my face, and I felt my world tilt. The reception was a blur of toasts and congratulations, but Clara and I kept stealing glances, like we were both afraid to break whatever had just happened. Victor approached us, his smile oily. Beautiful performance, he said, clapping slowly. But I wonder, how long can you keep it up? Clara's grip on my arm tightened, but I stepped forward. As long as it takes, I said, my voice low. You're not winning this, Victor. He laughed and walked away, but his words gnawed at me. That night, as the guests left and the estate grew quiet, Clara and I stood on the balcony, snow dusting our shoulders. You were amazing today, she said, her voice soft. I almost believed you meant it. My heart stopped. I did mean it, I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. Every word, Clara. I've always meant it. She froze, her eyes wide. Riley, what are you saying? I took a breath, my hands shaking. I'm saying I love you. I've loved you since Columbia, since you laughed at my terrible coffee order, since you stayed up all night helping me study. This marriage, it's never been fake for me. Her lips parted, but no words came. The silence stretched, and I felt my heart crack. Say something, I whispered. I need time, she said finally, her voice barely audible. She turned and walked inside, leaving me in the snow, my confession hanging in the air like a ghost. The snow kept falling as I stood on the balcony, Clara's absence a cold weight in my chest. I'd laid my heart bare, and she'd walked away. For the first time since this started, I wondered if I'd made a mistake. Not the marriage, not the lie, but telling her the truth. Back inside, The estate was quiet, the remnants of the vow renewal scattered like memories, empty champagne flutes, crumpled napkins, a single rose left on a table. Clara was nowhere to be found. I checked her room, the library, the kitchen, my panic growing with each empty space. Had I pushed her too far? Had I ruined everything? I found her in the garden, sitting on a bench under a snow-dusted oak, her white dress glowing in the moonlight. She didn't look up as I approached, but her shoulders tensed. "I'm sorry," she said before I could speak. "I didn't mean to run. I didn't know what to say." I sat beside her, leaving a careful distance. "You don't have to say anything," I said, though it hurt to mean it. "I shouldn't have sprung that on you." She shook her head, her curls catching the light. "No, Riley, you don't get it. I've been trying to figure this out for weeks, how I feel, what this is. And then you say you've loved me all along, and it's like it's too much." My heart sank. "Too much." "Not like that," she said quickly, turning to face me. Her eyes were wet, her voice raw. "It's too much because I think I feel it too, and I'm terrified. This wasn't supposed to happen. This was supposed to be a deal, a contract." Her words hit like a wave, hope and fear crashing together. "What are you saying?" I asked, echoing her question from earlier. "I'm saying I don't know how to do this," she said, her voice breaking. "I've spent my whole life doing what's expected, running the company, pleasing my dad, keeping up appearances. I've never let myself feel this." She gestured between us, her hand trembling. "But when I'm with you, it's different. It's real." I reached for her hand, my heart pounding. "Clara, it's always been real for me. But I need to know, what do you want?" She looked at me, her eyes searching mine. "I want to try," she whispered. "I want to see if this could be us." The world seemed to stop, the snow muffling everything but the sound of my own heartbeat. I leaned in, slow enough to give her an out, but she met me halfway, her lips soft and warm against mine. This kiss was different from the one at the renewal. No cameras, no audience, just us. When we pulled back, her forehead rested against mine, her breath shaky. "We can't screw this up," she said, half laughing, half crying. "Not with Victor watching." "We won't," I promised, though I knew the road ahead was fraught. Victor's investigator was still out there, and the board was still skeptical. But for the first time, I felt like we were fighting for something more than a company for us. The next morning, we drove back to the city, the air between us charged with something new. Clara reached for my hand as I drove, her fingers intertwining with mine. "We need to be careful," she said. "Victor's not going to let this go." "I know," I said, squeezing her hand. "But we're stronger than him. We've got something he doesn't, something real." She smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. But the moment was short-lived. When we got back to the penthouse, an email from her lawyer was waiting. Victor had filed a formal challenge to Clara's inheritance, claiming our marriage was a fraud. He had photos, testimonies, and a timeline that painted our relationship as a convenient lie. Clara's face went pale as she read the details. "He's got my ex's statement," she said, her voice hollow. "And someone from your firm, Riley. They're saying you only took this deal for the promotion." The betrayal stung, but I pushed it aside. "They can say what they want," I said. "We'll fight this. Together." We spent the next week in damage control, meeting with lawyers, crafting statements, and digging into Victor's own shady dealings. I barely slept, fueled by coffee and the need to protect Clara. She was fierce, poring over documents late into the night, but I could see the toll it was taking. One night, as we worked side by side, she leaned her head on my shoulder, her voice soft. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'll never have to find out," I said, kissing her forehead. It was a promise I meant to keep, no matter what came next. Victor's challenge was a ticking bomb, and we were running out of time to defuse it. The board had called an emergency meeting in 2 weeks to review his claims, and if we couldn't prove our marriage was real, Clara would lose everything. But it wasn't just the company at stake anymore, it was us, this fragile, beautiful thing we were building. We dove into battle mode. Clara's lawyer, a sharp woman named Elena, worked with us to counter Victor's evidence. We gathered affidavits from friends who'd seen us together, photos from events, even receipts from the coffee shop we'd frequented in law school. But Victor's investigator was thorough, and his accusations were relentless. A co-worker from my firm claimed I'd bragged about the promotion, and Clara's ex swore she'd never mentioned me romantically. Each piece was a half-truth, twisted to cut. One night, as we pored over documents in the penthouse, Clara slammed her laptop shut. "This is bullshit," she said, her voice shaking. "He's turning our lives into a soap opera and the board's eating it up." I reached for her, pulling her into my arms. "Let them," I said. "We know the truth. We're real." She buried her face in my chest, her breath warm against my shirt. "Are we?" she whispered. "Sometimes I'm scared this is all too good to be true." I tilted her chin up, meeting her eyes. "This is real," I said, my voice fierce. "You and me, we're not a contract anymore." She kissed me then, desperate and hungry, and for a moment, the world fell away. But the fear lingered. Victor wasn't just attacking our marriage. He was attacking our trust, planting doubts that gnawed at us both. The next day, Elena called with worse news. Victor had a recording. A junior associate at my firm, someone I'd barely spoken to, had taped me venting about the pressure of the marriage deal. I didn't remember the conversation, but the snippet was damning. Me saying I was in over my head and doing this for Clara. Out of context, it sounded like I was in it for the money. Clara listened to the audio in silence, her face unreadable. When it ended, she looked at me, her eyes guarded. "Is that how you feel?" she asked. "Like you're stuck?" "No," I said, my voice breaking. "That was months ago, before us. I was overwhelmed, Clara, but I never meant it like that. I love you." She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. It was the first time I felt her slipping away, and it terrified me. I spent the next few days trying to bridge the gap, leaving notes on her coffee mug, cooking her favorite pasta, holding her when she let me. But she was distant, her smiles forced, and I didn't know how to fix it. The night before the board meeting, we sat on the couch, the city lights casting shadows across the room. "I'm scared, Riley," she admitted, her voice small. "Not just about the company. About us. What if we're rushing this? What if it's all just pressure?" Her words cut deeper than Victor's accusations. "Do you think this isn't real?" I asked, my heart in my throat. "I don't know," she said, tears spilling over. "I want it to be, but I've spent my whole life pretending to be what people want. What if I'm doing that with you?" I took her hands, my voice steady despite the ache. "Clara, I see you. Not the heiress, not the CEO, just you. And I love you. If you need time, I'll wait. But I'm not going anywhere." She cried then, and I held her, the weight of her fears mixing with mine. We fell asleep like that, tangled together, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. The board meeting loomed like a storm. We dressed in silence that morning, Clara in a sharp blazer, me in my best suit. As we walked into the conference room, Victor's smirk greeted us, his folder of evidence thick and menacing. The board watched us like hawks, their faces unreadable. Clara spoke first, her voice clear and strong. She outlined her vision for the company, her father's legacy, and our commitment to each other. I followed, laying out the legal arguments, countering Victor's claims with evidence of our life together. But it was Clara's final words that silenced the room. "This marriage started as a necessity," she said, her hand finding mine. "But it's become my truth. Riley is my partner, in every sense, and I'll fight for her, just as she's fought for me." The room was still, and I felt tears prick my eyes. Victor opened his mouth to retort, but the board chair cut him off, calling for a vote. As we waited for their decision, Clara squeezed my hand, and I knew, no matter what happened, we'd face it together. The boardroom was suffocating, the air thick with tension as the board deliberated. Clara's hand stayed in mine, her grip steady despite the tremor I felt in her fingers. Victor sat across from us, his confidence unshaken, as if he'd already won. But Clara's words, "Riley is my partner," in every sense, echoed in my mind, anchoring me. For the first time, I believed we could do this, not just for the company but for us. The board chair, a stern woman named Margaret, cleared her throat. "After reviewing the evidence and hearing your statements, we've reached a decision," she said. My heart pounded as she continued. "Clara, your commitment to Everett Enterprises and to Ms. Kane is clear. The board votes to uphold your inheritance. Victor's challenge is dismissed." A gasp escaped Clara, and I squeezed her hand, relief flooding through me. Victor's face twisted, his mask of charm slipping into something ugly. "This isn't over," he spat, storming out. But his words were empty now, his power broken. The board members filed out, leaving us alone. Clara turned to me, her eyes shining with tears and something else, something fierce and alive. "We did it," she whispered, pulling me into a hug. I held her tight, feeling the weight of the past year lift, replaced by a warmth I hadn't dared hope for. Back at the penthouse, we celebrated with wine and takeout, sprawled on the couch like we were back in law school. Clara laughed more freely than I'd seen in months, her head resting on my shoulder. "I meant what I said," she told me, her voice soft. "You're my truth, Riley. I was scared, but I'm not anymore." I kissed her then, slow and certain, and it felt like a promise we'd both keep. The contract that had bound us was just paper now. What we had was real, forged in the fire of doubt and fear. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Clara took full control of Everett Enterprises, steering it with a vision that honored her father, but carried her own spark. I left my firm, starting my own practice to focus on cases that mattered, pro bono work for those who, like me, had fought their way up from nothing. Clara was my biggest supporter, her belief in me a steady flame. Victor tried one last jab, leaking a story to the press about our convenient marriage, but it backfired. The public fell in love with our story, a romance born from necessity, blooming into something true. We didn't hide from it. At a press conference, Clara held my hand and said, "Sometimes love finds you when you're not looking." I'm just glad I stopped long enough to see it. 1 year after the contract, we stood on the penthouse balcony, the city glittering below. Clara wrapped her arms around me, her breath warm against my neck. "I used to think this was cold," she said, her voice soft. "But you were always the warmth, Riley. You loved me all along." I smiled, my heart full. "And I always will." The journey hadn't been easy. Doubt, fear, and Victor's schemes had tested us, but it had led us here, to a love we'd fought for, a love that was ours. As the city hummed below, I knew this was only the beginning. We weren't just a contract anymore. We were home,